Hello, my name's Cindy Barber and I'm author of the Chronicle of Killian series. The first book is called Keeper of the Keystone and I would like to read you chapter 1. It's called The Assailant. Mathis battled through the stormy weather, his shoulders hunched forward, his head bowed, striving onwards whilst still clutching a parcel to his chest. The alley was gloomy, the pavement was slippery and puddles lined the uneven ground. He quickened his step, battling against the torrential rain, clinging on to the package he bought for his son's first birthday. He knew Michael wouldn't understand what was going on, but for Mathis, it was another milestone in his new life and a step further from the one he had left behind. Hearing footsteps, he glanced over his shoulder and saw a dark figure gaining ground. As the hairs on the back of his neck prickled, he surged forward at a greater pace, his heart pounding. The end of the alley was in sight. He frantically wiped the rain from his eyes and tried staring in front of him, but it was so dark he couldn't see if there was anyone nearby. Was it his imagination, or had the footsteps behind him quickened? He ran towards the end of the alley, which opened out onto a familiar street near the local farmhouse, and he tried scanning the fields for possible assistance. Lurching forward, his ankle landed awkwardly and he clutched the wall for support, but by then it was too late. A strong hand had gripped his right arm. Stubby fingers pinched his flesh under the denim material, spinning him round with such vigour that the parcel slipped from his grasp and landed sodden in a muddy puddle. Mathis faced his attacker, determined to show no fear. Although his assailant was wider than Mathis, he was a couple of inches shorter. As expected, he wore black from head to toe, from his muddy boots to his woolen balaclava. The only feature Mathis could distinguish were his misty green eyes. Straightening up to press his only advantage, Mathis gasped as he noted a knife handle protruding from a belt behind his attacker's back. "Come with me and no one will get hurt," he snarled. "What do you want?" Mathis demanded, trying to stop his voice from quivering. "Don't ask questions. You either come of your own accord or I'll force you." Aware of the knife but unwilling to give in so easily, he tried wrenching himself free. His move anticipated. The attacker punched Mathis just above the chin, forcing his head back and cutting his lip. Blood trickled down his skin. "So that's the way you want to play it, do you? Any wife? Kid perhaps?" "What's it to you?" Mathis slurred, his mouth stinging. "Have you or haven't you?" Shaking his head, Mathis prayed his eyes didn't betray his lies. There was no way he was going to allow his family to suffer with him. Just as well, a family would only complicate things. "What do you want?" His attacker's eyes smiled gleefully, and Mathis tried once more to pull away. This time the assailant aimed at his stomach. The force of the blow winded him, crunching into his ribs, causing such excruciating pain that he could barely breathe. As he was forced onto the floor, more blows pummeled down onto his shoulders and back, bruising him physically as well as emotionally. Pulling back Mathis' black hair, the assailant pulled him upright and forced him to look directly in his eyes. "Next in line, hey? Powerful position, don't you think?" How could he know? How had his past caught up with him? "But what about my brother?" "Dead. Killed in battle. And once you've helped us find the ring, you'll be joining him." Nausea swept over him and he began to retch. His brother was dead and he'd known nothing. He was never going to see him again. Rage consumed him. He would make sure that no one got their hands on the ring. Moving his arms behind his back, he mumbled a word he had used only once previously, then slipped the ring off his wedding finger until it dangled from his fingertips. Grappling to break free, he yelled as he struggled, disguising the sound of the metal as it landed, unnoticed in a murky puddle close to the discarded present. Steel pierced his flesh, and a sharp pain shot from his shoulder, reaching every part of his body. He watched his blood seep through his clothes and trickle down his chest as another nauseous sensation threatened to overwhelm him. Struggling, Mathis managed to dislodge the knife from his attacker's grasp. Sighing, he forced the green-eyed opponent backwards and managed to connect an uppercut to his fiend's jaw. Sensing an opportunity, He tried to grab the knife but wasn't quick enough, and so an elbow crashed down onto his shoulder. Exhaustion overwhelmed him. Unable to take any more, a final shove saw Mathis fall onto the floor, where he lay sprawled in a puddle. His brain instructed his legs to stand, but they refused to obey. His energy had evaporated. He was just too weak to fight back, too weak even to yell. Defeated, he lay still, his eyes so battered he could barely see. Awaited death. Instead of finishing him off, the masked figure produced a frayed piece of rope from a small rucksack he had been carrying over his shoulder. He ran his hands over it playfully, as Mathis turned his head to one side and prayed silently. All hope lost, he offered no resistance as his arms and legs were bound together. As his attacker stood up to observe his work, Mathis breathed a sigh of relief that at least the disguised figure remained oblivious to the fact that the ring that he so desperately wanted lay just inches away. Although the winds had subsided, the cold night air filled Mathis's lungs and stung his half-closed eyes. He tried staying conscious, but with each second that passed he felt fainter, his vision blurring until his eyes closed completely, leaving only the darkness and the sound of his heartbeat to drown out the pounding of the rain and the heavy breathing of his captor. Struggling to open his heavy eyes, Mathis noticed he was no longer outside, lying on a hard, wet floor. Instead, he lay on a leather settee, near an open fire. He couldn't have been there long, for although he felt warm, his clothes were still damp. Attempting to achieve a more comfortable position, he winced in pain, his shoulder throbbing from the untended stab wound. Blood, dark and solid, had clotted around its opening, while his jacket clung to him like a second layer of skin. Exhausted, he rested his head on an arm of the chair as he stared at the fire, gathering his thoughts. He watched as the embers soared into the air as birds will in flight, only to die, their vivid redness fade into black as they drifted, like the magical phoenix, into the flames below. He had no recollection of how he made it to the house, but he knew that if he had been found by a stranger, then they would have taken him to hospital. Knowing the attacker must be nearby, his eyes scoured the room for a means of escape. At the far end he noticed some bay windows, while halfway along the wall, to his right, a door was slightly ajar. He tried swinging his legs onto the edge of the settee, but was prevented by the binding which held his ankles together. His arms, though in front of him, were also tied. Unable to pick either knot, he wiggled his body towards the side of the sofa, but was soon out of breath and aching from the bruises he had sustained during the attack. Then he heard noises. Murmurs at first, but it wasn't long before the sounds became words. "You said you'd support me on this. You told me he wouldn't get hurt. You said he'd go along with it." A high-pitched voice trembled. "He won't tell me where it is. I need to get this answer from him. He's half dead in there. Surely that's enough." "Yeah, I know. I can't leave it like this," the man's voice growled. For a moment, there was quiet. Then the woman responded calmly. "You don't have to go through with this. Let's take him back to the alley and make an anonymous call to the ambulance. No one need know what you've done." Her words caressed Mathis's ears as he listened, aware that his fate lay in the hands of the winner's voice on the wall. "There's no going back. I ain't changing my mind." Pausing, his voice calmer than before, he pleaded, "I'm asking you to support me in this. Think of the rewards we'll get when we give him in and we hand the ring over." "I can't do it. It's not right," she sobbed. "So you'll split up our family for a prince who deserted his own country? How could you resort to this violence and kidnapping? What's happened to you?" Her voice was hysterical. Failing to get him to see reason, he could hear her words becoming more frantic, quickening and tumbling incoherently from her mouth. With no response forthcoming, her arguments quietened, her sadness at his betrayal audible. Holding his breath, Mathis prayed she would make him see sense, though he, like her, had given up hope. Think carefully about what you're doing. Soon someone will miss him and they will report his disappearance. He could have a wife at home waiting, calling the police even as we speak. He ain't got a wife, I've checked. And even if he does, what would it change? But stop it. Even if he had told someone about his past, which I doubt, he couldn't have told them about us. He doesn't even know who I am. Go back to bed, she shouted towards the sound of approaching feet. Her orders disobeyed. The feet made their way downstairs. Please don't hurt anyone, Dad. You're not going to kill him, are you? A girl's voice squealed. Dad, please put the gun down. I'm scared. A boy's voice trembled. How dare you tell me what to do? I'm in charge and you'll do as I say, do you hear? The man's voice boomed, filled with fury. The pleas became louder as their mum joined in, building into a crescendo. I'm phoning the police, cried the woman. Put the phone down. Richard, take your hand off the gun, she screamed. Richard, stop it, look. A sharp gasp, and then a gunshot filled the air. Then another. Then another. Then the screaming stopped. Conscious of the sound of heavy breathing, he was so confused he didn't even realise that it was him that was making the noise. All he knew was that his heart was beating so fast he couldn't tell what was throbbing more, his head, his chest, or his shoulder. It wasn't until he heard the clumping of boots from the hallway that he registered the implications of what had just taken place. Too frightened to contemplate the present, he was fully aware that any chance of freedom had just disappeared with the dying breaths of the hysterical woman and her 2 innocent children. The next chapter is called The Ring and will be read soon. I hope you enjoyed it.